Last night, in a Zoom with top donors, the Biden campaign tried to convince them to keep investing in the president's re-election bid. That his terrible debate performance was just a one-off. Here are portions of the audio from that meeting obtained by NBC News through a participant.
Everyone just needs to breathe through the nose for a minute and take a deep breath.
The media has spent a ton of time blowing this out of proportion.
He's probably in better health than most of us.
A donor on that call audibly groaned when Jen O'Malley Dillon said that last part about President Biden's health. And another told me they were galled by the campaign's efforts to blame bad polling on the media, calling it, quote, pretty Trumpian. That donor also said they'd redirect their money to outside groups if Biden remained in the race because they say it's getting harder to trust the campaign's judgment. Joining us now, New York Times reporter Jeremy Peters and former Democratic Congressman Max Rose. So, Jeremy, tell me a little bit more about what you're hearing among Democrats regarding President Biden. That donor call and the conversations I had around it was elucidating.
Right. And I think that it displays this level of dismissiveness that the Biden campaign has long acted with regard to the president's health and his cognitive abilities or seeming lack thereof after we watched this debate. I mean, the campaign has known about concerns over President Biden's mental fitness since the 2020 race. And back then, they were dismissing them. They have dismissed them up until last Thursday night, basically telling voters to cover their ears and eyes and pretend that they're not seeing what they can plainly see. And that's that President Biden is not the man he was 4 years ago, is not the man he was 8 years ago when he was, or even before then, when he was vice president to Barack Obama. But now they're being forced to confront the fact that they can no longer deny this. But they're doing this in such a dismissive way, Katie, that, as you correctly point out, donors are pretty aggrieved by this. They're pretty insulted that they're just being told, oh, nothing to see here. I mean, being told to breathe deeply through your nose. This isn't a yoga class. This is the American democracy at stake here.
The donors obviously fund the campaigns. They fund the get out the vote efforts. They matter to campaigns. They very much matter. Democratic voices like Max Rose here obviously matter. But when we're talking about who's really going to matter in November, it's the voters. And the voters have consistently said that they don't believe Joe Biden should be the nominee. And more of them are now saying they worry about his ability to govern, that he's not going to be well enough to govern over the next 4 years. And these numbers haven't gotten better. They've gotten worse for the campaign. We can put up some of the polling. I believe we have some of that on hand. But Congressman, as you see it right now, do you think the president should stay in this race?
Yeah.
Why?
I think that when this comes down to it, right, we need to look at what the data says in a couple of weeks.
Doesn't the data say voters don't want him?
No, well, I care about what the head-to-head says. Let's just talk about straight up winning, right? Because that's what every Democrat wants to do. Right now, probably in the day after the debate happened, a poll went out. That poll will take about 3 to 4 days to complete. Then it'll take about another 3 days for the analysis to be completed. Let's see what that data says. I'm certain that they're starting to poll what other people look like in head-to-heads with Trump. Let's look at what that data says, because that's ultimately what this is going to come down to. But there's no doubt right now that the Biden campaign is in a very different place than where it was a week ago, and it has new responsibilities and new obligations, and it has to shift.
Devil's advocate here, and I want to ask you why the belief is that there cannot be another candidate, that there's not enough time to have another candidate. You have the majority of the American people saying they don't like either one of these guys. You also have the evidence that we can use from the last election between the president and Donald Trump was that enthusiasm was what the election hinged on. And the enthusiasm for Biden was just a little bit better than the enthusiasm for Donald Trump. The enthusiasm numbers are not great today. So if you're looking at somebody who, I mean, Donald Trump enjoys quite a broad enthusiasm among his supporters. Joe Biden enjoys enthusiasm among people who hate Donald Trump.
Sure.
But there are people who need to be convinced to come out. And those are the ones that are going to decide the election. If they are not enthusiastic, then Joe Biden's going to lose.
Well, so what you just described in many ways is what the 2020 election looked like. Now, I'm not here as a a surrogate paid or otherwise of the Biden campaign. So totally unvarnished opinion, right? You have two questions, right? Would Democrats prefer Biden be younger? Of course. There's another question, though, is would they prefer someone else to be running? And the second that you explore that lane, then it's who? And what we have yet to really understand as we tally that out is who would that person be? Could they build an operation this quickly? Could they raise the funds? And secondly, could there be a realistic scenario where it's someone else but not Kamala Harris? And the logistics of that are absolutely nearly impossible. So it's a massively complicated.
You're not giving Democratic voters and the Democratic Party credit enough in its ability to organize last minute. I mean, if something forced Biden to drop out, say there was an accident or some sort of health emergency, he would have to go. You don't think the Democratic Party could get it together and still win an election?
It's absolutely possible. What I don't think they could get together right now, and this is what no one's talking about, is I don't know how they could possibly skip over Kamala Harris. And I don't think you can answer that. I don't think any of those fancy donors could answer that. And so they're all saying, open convention, pick someone else, and just skip over Kamala Harris, the president's number two, the person who stood right by the president, who represents not only a leader in and of her own right, who actually has a legal right to that $220 million that they have sitting in that campaign account, but also as a woman of color that's a pillar of the Democratic base. You're just going to skip right over her? That's something that no one in the party, as they seek to continue to be unified in the face of Trump, wants to actually deal with, and no one's talking about it.
Jeremy, please jump in on this. What does your reporting tell you about the Democratic Party's preparations? And what does it tell you about Vice President Kamala Harris and whether she would be the one to take up this mantle if Joe Biden stepped aside?
Well, I disagree with Max. I think plenty of people are talking about ways to skip over Kamala Harris. In fact, if you listen to Democratic leaders, Democratic donors, especially when they're speaking anonymously, privately, they say that she is by far the weakest of the candidates who are mentioned most frequently as possible Biden replacements. Now, of course, she and her team are going to make it very difficult, should the situation come to that, to skip over her, because you can already see in some of the quotes that they're, seeding stories with anonymously, that they are going to point to the fact that she is a woman of color, and people are saying, no, next, please. That's going to be very difficult for a lot of Democrats to get past, but that is the strategic move that Kamala Harris's camp seems to be turning to right now. I think, the Biden campaign and a lot of Democrats who are saying that they still want him to be the nominee point to a lot of hypotheticals that we don't really know the answer to, of course. And that's how would a brokered convention look like? How messy would that be? How divided would it make the party? Is it even logistically possible to replace him? Those are all hypotheticals. But I'll give you another hypothetical, Katie. And that's if President Biden has another slip up that makes him look mentally diminished. If that happens, all bets are off. And the likelihood of something like that happening again, I would say, between now and November is quite high.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.